Namaste. Welcome to another edition of Nava Vimarsh podcast. So we are back in our time. So now we have with us Mr. Adhirath Sethi, the author of the book The Moving of the Mountains. So Namaste, Adhirath ji.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for the time. Thank you for agreeing to this interview and to review the book. So we'll get down to our conversations. So the title of the book, The Moving of the Mountains. Okay. So I have gone through the book. There is no mountain as such. So why the name as Moving of the Mountains?
We refer to it actually in the last line of the book. And I'm sure anyone reading it maybe had a clue early on when we speak about the name. But the foundation is called Agastya, and it was named after the sage Agastya. And in mythological times, he was well known and revered as one of the Maharishis of yesteryear. And one of the stories that is most popular about Agastya was that he was coming down to the south of India and he wasn't able to cross the Vindhyas. The Vindhyas had grown too tall too quickly. And being a very powerful sage, he requested the Vindhyas to bow their heads and allow him to pass over. And he made them promise that until he passes north again, they would stay bowed. So he'd have the passage when he went back. Whether he knew it or not, I don't know, but he never went north again. He spent the rest of his life in the south. And so the Vindhyas stayed. And this is part of Indian mythology that the Vindhyas would have been taller than Everest had Agastya not done this. Now, a few things about Agastya. One is they named the foundation after him because he was also known as being a great scientist and a man who spread education across India during his time. And that was something that the foundation, of course, was trying to do, to spread education. And so the other thing is, of course, because the Vindhyas were made to go lower, north and south of India always stayed unified. It was something that is considered one of the reasons that the country wasn't two different nations. And so here was a foundation trying again to unify the nation with a vision for education and spreading education like the sage. And that had come upon a fairly Herculean task, a monumental task, you could say, that was going to require a huge push and a huge amount of resistance from the existing system. So we saw it in a way as akin to moving a mountain itself. And that tied back into the name of Agastya. And so in the book, when we were thinking about names for the book, it struck me, I liked the way it sounded, I liked the alliterative quality of the title, and then we found it gelled very well with the sage Agastya and gave him the due reverence that we would have liked to have afforded him for lending his name to us. Yeah.
Yeah. So before we move forward and talk about the book itself, let's for the audience that the book is available in Amazon. The link is there also in the description as well as in the chat. So people who are curious by just hearing why the book's name is Move the Mountains, people can check it out. And from my experience, I have gone through the book. So the book is written in a very language which is very accessible, quite actually entertaining and curiosity driven. So it's like the book is like kind of a travel log in a way, where let me just get one more thing correct. Yes, Ramji Raghavan, who founded the Agastya Foundation and whose philosophy and vision has seen grow over the years, where the Agastya Foundation has now reached to 5 million children, if I'm correct. 5 million kids. Yeah. So Agastya Foundation has over the years has reached out to 5 million kids, and by doing this work, they have ignited the curiosity among the kids to learn science and go beyond science. So this book is going to tell the story of Ramji Raghavan, how his vision and his persistence and his acumen for management and acumen to achieve something which is beyond the imagination of a common person. And people are going to enjoy this book, reading this book. And the last part, which I'm going to just name it, but not going to tell you, there are, in the last portion, there's a key takeaway points, which he mentions in the book. So people who are reading the book, buying the book, you can only buy the book if you want to buy the book. Just by I'm just show it to you for the audience, and before we go forward, uh, yeah. So I need to remove this. So this is the key takeaway point. The audience can see if only buy the book for these key takeaway points that we will see here. And I can bet you it will change your life the way you see things around. So 10 management books are condensed into key takeaway points, which will improve your life, and your problems look very, very small when you know how to solve them. So this book teaches you how to solve problems and how to overcome hurdles. So over to you, Adhirath ji. So this is the book. It is available in Amazon. Please go ahead, buy it. I can guarantee you, I have read a lot of books, but this is one of the books which I will be rereading again and again to get the learnings more and more when I have some issues to work around. So we'll come back to our discussion. So I have one more graphic. So before you start, let's have the graphics for the audience. So, Adhirath ji, if you could just like describe how the Agastya Foundation was founded, what was the journey, and we'll go to the graphics itself.
Yeah. So 1999, as you've correctly said, is the year the foundation was officially registered. And Ramji Raghavan, who you mentioned, is our chairman and co-founder. And along with four others, he came together with four others, and they envisioned this. They envisioned Agastya. Ramji himself at that time was a financier. He was based in London, and he was settled over there. Had been for many years, but I suppose at some point he felt that there was something lacking. That he was making money and he was doing very well, but the industry and the kind of work he was doing was, in his own words, it wasn't very soul enriching. And he had always thought about education as something that he might want to one day look into. He wasn't quite sure what he wanted to do in education, but I think in a very bold and, in his own words, foolhardy move, he quit everything, came to India, and then he started doing a lot of work around trying to figure out what is it that we really needs to do in education, what's lacking, what can be done. And one of the things they came together to decide was that education in India has become quite rote learning based. It's very much based on answerism. Kids are encouraged to learn for the sole purpose of passing an exam. And if creativity and curiosity were not infused back into Indian education, then one or two generations down the line, we'd really start seeing a fairly fundamental shift in the wrong direction. And the world was changing. The West was dominating. You could say India was still very much on the beginning of its inflection cycle. What we see today is quite different from the picture there was in, you could say, 1999. We were still just kind of getting onto the global stage. And Agastya genuinely felt that as India grows and as the demand for high quality thinkers grows, the children that we nurture and the children that we push through the education system have to be geared with that kind of thinking. And so creativity, curiosity, innovative thinking were the three pillars that Agastya started with. And later on, as they evolved the idea, as they evolved the vision, they realized that instilling these things in children, creativity, curiosity, and innovation, led to a culture of caring and confidence. Children were more caring of of their peers. Children, especially children in rural backgrounds, children in government schools, had an added sense of confidence when it came to speaking to others and confidence for their own futures and their own capabilities. So that was what Agastya was trying to put in place. And as we'll see, the ways that they kind of did it, there were different ways they kind of managed to do this, and they were quite unique and creative in their own right.
Okay, so I want to talk about a little bit more about the this Ashoka Fellowship recognition and also government partnership. So how does the Augusta Foundation actually working with governments as well as uh, private NGOs to actually further the cause of especially STEM education, science education, create curiosity among the kids to learn and a different way of learning, as you mentioned.
So, to step back a little bit, Agastya does all this by the use of mobile vans and mobile delivery mechanisms. So, what we do is we try and take science experiments, low cost science experiments, very hands on experiments, and we load them in the mobile vans or on a bike. And this van goes with an instructor to a government school. We usually now, of course, have time set aside with the school to say, on a Monday or a Tuesday, we will be coming at such and such time. And these sessions last for about 2 hours. So the Agastya instructor, or ignators as we call them, their job is to demonstrate how science works in action. And we typically work with children who are between 10 and, you could say, fifth standard to ninth standard, basically, that age group. We do understand that once ninth is over and 10th starts, board exams do become very critical, and children don't want to be distracted, or it's important that they focus on their upcoming board exams. But for those 4 years or 5 years between the fifth and the ninth, we find they're very receptive, firstly, to creativity thinking, to innovative thinking. And what they realized is that when you take a child that's already learning something, say in a textbook, and now you show them, okay, now this is how it works in practice, it opens up a whole different avenue for them in terms of how they think about what they're learning. And so children who were so far only understanding things from the words that were written, only understanding things that were told to them by the teacher, were suddenly seeing things moving around. They were seeing these experiments. They were allowed to touch them, break them even, because they were quite low cost. And the idea was, make it again. Go home and use the same low cost, it could be a bottle and a rubber band and something else being used to show principles of elasticity, for example. Go home and you can reconstruct this yourself. So children are finding joy in that kind of being able to play around with that kind of science. And the other, you could say, half of Agastya, or the other side, is teacher training. So while Agastya knew it was very important to inspire children, they knew it was extremely important to engage them and infuse joy back into their learning. It could only go so far if their teachers weren't engaged in the same way. So a lot of effort went into bringing in teachers from government schools, training the teachers to think the way that the Agastya ignators were being trained to think, and then sending them back with this renewed sense of joy for their own profession. One of the things that Agastya realized very early on was that teaching was becoming a profession of the last resort. It is an unfortunate fact of not just Indian education, but all education, that we don't pay teachers very well. And it is usually a bit of a struggle for a teacher to continue in their role. And what we didn't want was for that to then feed into the way that their enthusiasm for their craft. So training these teachers, inspiring them, working with them to themselves find the joy in their own subjects was something Agastya worked very hard on. Now, once we started doing this, through the combination of the mobile delivery mechanism, through a combination of science fairs, local science fairs, initially in and around the town of Kuppam in Andhra Pradesh, where Agastya's campus is today located, we found a lot of government officials stepping forward saying, hey, we really appreciate what you guys did. Or, there was a fair and a lot of people turned up. There were huge footfalls. Parents were excited. Children were excited. Can you do this again in my constituency? Or can you do it, in a larger scale? And once that started happening, a lot of feedback came from the schools saying that the children enjoy the sessions, that it's extremely beneficial for them. The attendance rates have gone up. The engagement rates have gone up. And then the government stepped forward and said, yes, we'd like to support you. And what can we do to make things easier for you and give you the kind of reach that you want? So that's when Agastya found a lot of support from the government. And as time went on, of course, there was a lot of support from private donors as well. And while the government was able to give infrastructure, they were able to give, for example, space in schools. Funding, a lot of the funding, of course, came from the private sector. Not to say that the Karnataka government didn't help, because they were extremely helpful, even in a financial sense, in pushing a lot of the programs forward. But once the private sector donors came along and started giving us funds to develop our programs more to the further reaches, then things really took off. And so we've managed to do this with a combination of government support and private support, like any, I suppose, NGO would need. But it's been tremendous to see how everybody that has supported us has always come back and said, we're so glad that we did this and we partnered with you, because there's only been a positive. There's never been anyone that's come back saying they're not having an impact or not having the effect that we're trying to have. So that's been extremely good and encouraging for us.
Yes, you mentioned something which is very important, is that the support of the society, the government, and individuals. So there have been like eminent individuals who have working with Agastya. So, and in the book mentions, correct, that the teachers or professors from IISc Bengaluru have contributed. Sridham Raghavanji has in himself, he has talked to many people, eminent people like Harvard professors, scientists, to learn from them and invest them into again into Agastya and build the organization that it just become today. So one aspect of which the education sector in India, which is actually quite a problem, is the problem of rote learning versus like creating curiosity among people, among the children specifically. That it's not what you teach, it's how you teach. So it's one of the core aspects of the foundation itself and also the book itself. It gives a bit of a journey that how this philosophy of how you teach is more important than what you teach to
Yeah.
the kids. So if you could just elaborate, what is the teaching mechanism, the philosophy behind the school bands, the experiments, and how it is different from the rote learning that we see in general as exam focused system of education?
So I'm going to say two things, and one is on rote learning itself. Rote learning was never the culture of Indian education, to be honest. The Gurukul system and the historic way that children learned, which is really more of a way of life, where you went, you lived, you kind of you learned as you lived, really, with your guru. That was actually the traditional form. And then when the British came, there was what's called the Lancastrian system, which again was not supposed to be rote learning. It was supposed to be more peer to peer plus some amount of memorization and stuff like that. But somehow the peer to peer got lost, and then that became the culture. And what I like to say is, and I'll come to the way that we do it differently, but I always use this analogy of cricket. When we saw Indian players maybe 15, 20 years ago, before money really came into the cricket scene, we only went by average. If you wanted to know how good a batsman was, especially you go into Ranji, you saw him play. If his average was very good, you put him in the national team. Now, a player could only play defending his average because he knew that is the one metric being used to gauge whether he's good or not good. So you never had players coming into the national scene who were strikingly good fielders, but maybe just kind of with an average of 36, 37, right? And once money started coming into cricket, once people started understanding that you could, the reason the average, of course, was that too many players. You had to like assess thousands of players, and the bandwidth was very limited to really go in deep and understand them holistically. And once that changed, once money started coming in and the bandwidth, and you could really evaluate players more holistically, then you started seeing a change in Indian cricket, wherein you would get really good match winners. People who could play under pressure, like Dhoni, for example, may not have been selected back in the day just as a batsman, because he didn't really become a great batsman till later on. He was a match winner. He was someone who could play under tremendous pressure, which was a quality we weren't really able to assess. So looking at marks is akin to looking at averages. And India has been doing that, unfortunately, for a long time. Again, because the volumes are so huge, it's difficult to assess a student on multiple intelligences when there is so many students to assess. And I think what Agastya has done is shown that if you can bring that spark into a child, you'll start seeing them do things which will force you to take notice. And then you start pulling in kids who are, okay, maybe he's not getting 99, he may be getting 90 or 92. But this is the kind of kid who in the class will think of the one solution to a problem that nobody else has thought of, because his brain works slightly differently. Or this is the one kid who will somehow combine music and maths and create a whole new kind of subgenre of a subject, which again you can't just purely get if you look at this. So what Agastya did, to come back to your question on what we did differently, it's one anecdote that we hear, which we've written about in the book also, is when Ramji was asking kids, okay, I will give you the models in your school. Will you still come to Agastya? And they said, yes, sir, we will. So he said, okay, fine. Why will you? Like, okay, fine. I will keep the mobile van in your school and you can play with the models all day long. Will you still come to Agastya? I said, yes, yes, sir, we will. He's like, fine, fine. I will train your school and everyone there on the models, and you'll be playing with these models all day long. Will you still come to Agastya? They said, yes, sir, we will. So finally, he said, why will you come to Agastya? And he said, sir, because the Agastya instructor treats us like a friend. So one of the things we did extremely well was to build a connect between the teacher and the student, which I think stripped away any kind of fear that the child might have for asking a question. And many kids have come back and saying this, right? Like, what changed, or what change do you see in yourself when Agastya, because of Agastya? And one of the kids put her hands up and said, sir, I'm not afraid to speak anymore. I don't mind if I say something silly, no one laughs. The class is more, the instructor is like, okay, fine, you've said that. Let's, as opposed to a lot of us have been through schooling where you're scared to put your hand up and say something because what if it's not intelligent? What if it's a silly question or a silly answer to a question? And so stripping away the fear, I think, was one thing that Agastya did very well and very early on. Understanding how to build a great rapport was instrumental to that. And I think the nature of the models was very approachable. We weren't trying to take uh, high end microscopes and magnifying glasses or expensive models of the solar system into government schools because we knew that the children would be intimidated by all that. Oh, how can I touch? It's an expensive device, I can't touch it. But you give them something that's made with bottle caps and rubber bands and bits of plastic and some wire, and suddenly you realize they didn't even realize that science was hidden in all these things. And then the world opens up to them, and then they're not scared anymore to come and interact. And if they break the model, they don't say, oh, I'm sorry. They say, oh gosh, let's try and put it back together. If you give a kid an expensive microscope and they drop it by mistake, then fear sets in that, oh, I hope I've not done some financial damage. So I think that has been very crucial in the way that Agastya has operated to come to the level of what a child feels comfortable interacting with, and using that as the medium to reach them and to help them.
Yes, you hit upon a give a very good example that the like I also interact with people who are just passed out of their university and join, and this lack of confidence among Indian students and kids specifically, because of the way the education system actually works, is you are given instructions and then you need to follow them. You are not allowed to ask questions.
Yeah.
Okay, and fear of failure, okay, which is a very real thing. Okay, we are not an innovative society because the society doesn't like failure. Okay,
Yeah.
but the thing is, the only learning you can ever take place is by breaking something and then fixing it again.
Yeah.
That's how learning, how the brain wiring works. That if you do something, you're bound to make some mistakes. You will learn from those mistakes, and again, the brain wiring will again rewire itself, and the learning will start. So this uh, like creating a proper environment, I will say an environment where curiosity is allowed to grow its potential and it aids the learning. So this concept of curiosity is like core philosophy of Augusta itself, the way they teach people. So uh, I want to know, understand, like when you are designing your experiments or courses, correct, your primary focus is to spark the curiosity in the kid so that the kid wants to touch, and even if it breaks it, he will be able to fix it. Okay.
Exactly.
So that's a really beautiful way of actually teaching kids. Okay. So how do you have like how do you actually do this? Like if you can give an example of an experiment or some course that you have designed, so people will actually understand. If, actually, it may teach the parents who are watching or other people watching that okay, they have a kid or they have a nephew, they can actually talk to them and tell them, okay, you do this thing.
And so obviously there are very smart people behind Agastya who designed these things. And as we describe in the book, a lot of the initial models were actually designed by the Homi Bhabha Atomic Center. They were doing some work around creativity learning, and thankfully we had access. One of the great gifts that I could say Agastya had was we very quickly had access to thought leaders, to scientists who many of whom were semi-retired or even retired, but still had the energy and the passion to actually devise and develop these science experiments. So a lot of the early experiments that were actually built by them, and they were built with a very almost scientific approach to how these to thinking about the science and saying, okay, now is this really capturing the gist of it? Now, Agastya has used everything from a candle. So, in the book, there's a very nice anecdote about the candle and what Faraday said about the secrets of science being locked just inside of a single candle. And I think one of the most engaging conversations Agastya had was in a workshop that I remember was when he just lit a candle and a room full of teachers, educated educators, you could say, who'd done a lot of science, were asked, "What's burning? Tell me what's burning when I light a candle." And so discussion, of course, goes on, and people are saying the wick is burning. No, no, the wax is liquid, and it's being that the wax around in the wick is burning, and there was no satisfactory answer. And then eventually, of course, the answer is that the wax is effectively pulled through the wick through capillary reaction, and at the point where it vaporizes, it turns into a gas, and it is at that instant that it actually starts burning. So it's actually the air around the wick which is really vaporized paraffin wax. And a lot of teachers didn't know this, and students sometimes don't know this, because you see a candle and it's an obvious thing. A candle is a very common thing that everybody has seen, a flame or a diya, and you don't really, your brain doesn't kind of go to the point of what is actually on fire when I look at this. I think that's very interesting. Recently, there was a nice thing that someone posted online in one of Agastya's social media channels, which was of just a origami, I guess not a dinosaur, but just a four-legged creature made from origami that you put on an incline, and it just kind of walks down on its own with no motor, no mechanism. Basically, it's wind resistance and gravity balancing each other to just move this origami four-legged creature down an inclined plane at a very steady pace. So it almost looks unnatural. It looks like magic because there's this thing that's moving, and you think it's either AI or there's some trick that's been happening, but it's not. It's just science. And these give you a kind of idea of how very low cost methods can be used to start asking questions that are much, much deeper. So the science behind the creature that I was saying that walks down, which is just made of folded paper, is you need to understand gravity, you need to understand air resistance, and you need to understand that when something is impacted by gravity on an inclined plane, it's not falling the way that it would normally fall. It's having vectors and there's forces. There's a lot of science buried into one tiny thing like that. So, as I said, Agastya uses low cost methods, and I think if you go on the website or if you go online, there's a lot of illustration of smaller models and some more complex, some quite simple. But the idea is to have a child look at it and immediately realize that there is simplicity in the intellectual debate that you can have, and there's complexity that can be harnessed when you go deeper, but that the entry point is not necessarily rocket science. It could be something very simple and very engaging that even a child can then get have a word to say about or have a meaningful discussion about before they go deeper.
Yeah, actually, I am sharing a story from Agastya itself. So
Mhm.
she Shushmita. I think it's the correct medium channel of Agastya Foundation,
Yeah.
where you have this story. So people who want to explore more about it, you can go to Agastya Foundation, agastya.org, where you can find their programs, uh, what they do, okay, how they are working on people, their impact. So they will be able to find out a lot of information regarding Agastya, and the most important, how you can get involved.
Yeah.
So, like people who are watching this now, there are about 30 people who are watching this live with us. So, people who are curious about what Agastya does and how you can contribute, do go to the website agastya.org and go to the Get Involved page, and you'll be able to see how you can contribute to this. And they have, I think, a few openings available where you can contribute. It's really heartening to see. that an education program like you and the way you are teaching people, and now people can actually contribute. That's the most
Yeah.
important thing which needs to be helped more. More people need to get involved in this. I'll come back to one more question, which was actually I had in my mind. Okay, that when I was talking to you prior to the book, said this book is like a kind of a travelogue in one way, where you mention in one of the chapters that teachers and the or you say people who are reaching out to the kids in the remote villages, the way they navigate the villages, the way they stay there, the way they interact, the way you describe the atmosphere, uh, the surroundings of the book. It's really, and I just wanted to uh, touch upon that, that you have reached out to all 5 million kids all over the country. How Agastya Foundation manages mammoth task of logistics to reach out to these remote villages where sometimes I think in the early stages of the book people can read it. So the founder had actually came from a village where there was no electricity at that time, and it was a dusty school. So from that village and school where he came, and he was in London, and he came back to the same village again and found nothing has changed. So it was his vision that I need to reach out to people, and maybe it was his inner calling that I need to give back to society and take upon his job to actually reach out to kids, underprivileged kids who doesn't have the wherewithal to actually access
Mhm.
good quality education. And Agastya is doing this. So how you manage this mammoth task of reaching out to remote villages, taking uh, the experiments, taking teachers, getting them to there and do the workshops. So if you can give little bit of insight that how this mammoth task is achieved by Agastya.
Right. So one thing I should just correct you slightly is it's 5 million kids we reach per year.
Per
And
year, okay.
yeah, so totally, I think in Augusta, in the last 25 years, we've reached about 25 million kids. So obviously, the number each year we try and grow that. And now the vision is, of course, to reach 100 million children by 2032, I think. And that's what we currently call Agastya's Vision 2.0, which is the path that we are on currently. But when and to explain Agastya's structure, we are what you might call it's a hub and spoke model, right? So we have a campus, 172-acre campus in Kuppam, in Gurupalli, in Andhra Pradesh, and this sits at the kind of cusp between Andhra, Tamil Nadu, and Karnataka. So it's very nicely positioned with equal access to all three states. And the campus serves as, you could say, the ideation center. We have many, many labs and larger buildings over there where each building is dedicated to a different specialty. So there's a maths lab, a biodiversity lab, chemistry, physics, robotics. These specializations are all studied over there. And there's also something called a vision work, where a lot of the models that we are talking about are ideated. Proto Prototypes effectively are built over there, so then we can work with children at the campus, figure out, and then improve on the model basically. And surrounding schools around the campus send their kids every day, different schools. So each day, about 600 kids come from surrounding schools onto campus. And that experience is extremely rich because you get access to the instructors, you get access to these wonderful labs. Of course, there's food on the campus, there's even residential accommodation if, in case some children, sometimes we'll have classes and schools who want their kids to stay overnight and have maybe 2 or 3 days of a session. That might happen. And then as you go further away from the campus, we have science centers. So Agastya is currently in about 22 states. And so we have these science centers peppered all around the country. And these act as watering holes wherein experiments are housed. Again, there's an instructor there that will be in charge of that center. And the center can vary from maybe a 1,000, 2,000 square feet to some of the larger ones, which may be 10, 15,000 square feet. As I said, government has always been supportive. So there's always extra space in government schools or certain government buildings. And the government has always been very kind to say, yes, this area could benefit if there's a science center here. And the vans and the bikes, so we have mobile vans, we have lab on a bike, we have what we call lab in a box, which is basically experiments in a suitcase. So there's a different, you could say 12 or about a dozen different cases, each one having a different kind of variety of experiments. So an instructor will come, he will take one box and say, okay, today I'm going to choose schools in this area. Then next week he might come take a different box and say, I'm going to schools in another area where the kids are maybe slightly older, so they need a different variety of experiments. And like this, the network kind of operates. So that is the bulk of Agastya's reach comes from this thing of either a mobile van goes to a larger school, or a lab on a bike goes to a slightly smaller school, which is kind of more in a more difficult to reach area where maybe a van cannot go. And finally, lab in a box, where an instructor will really go with on foot using the public transport system and effectively walk his way to a very small school with maybe 5 kids. But the idea is we still want to reach these kids. We still want to reach the child that can't be reached and make sure that we penetrate as far into the rural areas as we can. Now, as you said, it's not easy. It's a huge network to manage. There are about 5,000 people to take care of. But what Agastya has done brilliantly, other than reaching its children in a very easy to approach way, is to build a culture of ownership, to build a culture of entrepreneurship, even amongst the frontline workers, to build a culture wherein Agastya's successes and failures become very personal to every employee and staff member at Agastya. And while we do have a very intense and very well regulated total quality management program to ensure that even if someone is, say, remote village somewhere in Bihar or somewhere in the Northeast, for example, where we've now managed to finally get a footprint, even that person needs to understand the quality level, the way a class should be structured, the way the children should be interacted with, the same way as they would understand if they were, say, very close to the Kuppam campus or very close to Bangalore, where a lot of the action happens. We want every instructor to have that kind of uniformity in their understanding of what it is that Agastya is trying to do. And so it's not easy. We have obviously regional managers, and those folks have people under them. But as you'll read in the book, one of the things Ramji said that they did very early on, which he got inspiration from speaking to an army a general in the Indian Army, was when he was asked by the general, whom do you think the soldier is fighting for when he goes out to battle? In gunfire, in a high tense situation where the enemy is raining bullets down on them, whom do you think the soldier is fighting for? And Ramji said, well, I guess his country. And the general said, look, you want to be a patriot, that's nice, but in the thick of battle, I can guarantee you he's not, unfortunately, thinking only of his country. That's not his immediate driving force. So then Ramji said, well, I suppose his family, right? I mean, there's people back home, and in a way his heart is, he's holding on because he wants to protect them in a way. And he said, yes, well, I suppose, yes, you could say that. Maybe there's some element of, I want to make my parents proud, or, my children, and I have to do this for them. But he said, ultimately, they are fighting for their commanding officer. And if the commanding officer is a man that they respect and whom they want to honor and whom they believe has their best interests at heart, these boys will just run in to any battle, knowing that he has their backs. And so that kind of inspired Ramji to say, we need to build that kind of connect between the foot soldiers who are going into the schools and their immediate regional managers who are trying to deploy them in a way that is beneficial for Agastya. And if they have a strong connect and a strong desire that this person needs to be satisfied and should be happy with the way I'm working, then the last line, the foot soldier, the front line, will behave in a way that we then can just say, yes, everyone's going to behave in a way that's good, and that does help. And so a lot of, as you said, Agastya's work has been not just as an NGO, but to build an organization where ownership goes right down to the last person. And I've seen this even on campus. If I speak to the cleaning lady or the cooks or the folks that are just managing the guest houses there, they all know the vision of Agastya. They know what the foundation is trying to do, and they all understand the enormity and the importance and the privilege of the task that they've been given, and it's very close to their hearts. They're not just cleaning or making food for making food's sake. They understand that in doing what they're doing, they're actually furthering the cause of education. They're furthering the cause of creativity learning for disadvantaged children across the country. And so I guess that has been how Agastya has managed, you could say, to maintain a kind of uniformity in their approach and to ensure that even though they are sitting here, the main hub is in Kuppam here in South India. But when an instructor goes out to a government school in the outskirts of Gurgaon or in somewhere in, close to Chandigarh or anywhere, they still have a very strong connect with the folks back in HQ, as you could say, and they understand that what they're doing is of importance.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to come back to the point that we actually started. So I want to talk about a little bit more about the pandemic adoption. I think education sector was, I think, one of the worst affected sectors in terms of when pandemic hit, and for almost close to 2.5 years we were bound to our chairs and homes. And how Augusta manage this? Because one of the things which I want to tell people that I would have read, or many people would have read a lot of books on management, time management, disaster management, management in general. How do you manage things? If you read this book without realizing that you are reading a book about Agastya Foundation and how it has evolved to become a leader in providing low cost, high quality STEM education instructions to the underprivileged kids, okay, through their campuses and programs. But by reading this book, you will understand inherently, without realizing, how to manage things, how to make things organized and keep things going. So it's like a management book uh, hidden in a way of talking about Augusta. So people who like reading management, people who do not like reading management books or non-fiction books, read this book and you will enjoy the book just reading about Augusta and its journey. And while reading the book, you will learn a lot about management itself, the style of management which Ramji has actually taught to all of the members and also learned. So I just wanted to focus a little bit more on how Augusta managed the pandemic situation, because as mentioned, it's a mammoth task anyway to actually, as a non-government organization NGO, managing this whole infrastructure logistics when COVID hits. How did you manage it? I mean, how it impacted you, and how the learning and innovation came from that incident?
So one of the things, when you see a lot of startups today and you think of the volumes that they're trying to generate and how cutthroat it becomes, and you don't honestly envy the pressure that they're under to deliver these volumes. And then you see an organization like Agastya that's delivering these volumes, but there's nothing cutthroat about the approach. There's an extreme humanity to everybody across the line, right up to Ramji and everybody that I spoke with during my writing the book. I interviewed about 100 people, and I could say the kind of affection they feel for what they're doing and the humanity with which they approach it was something that I think is the reason Agastya survived the pandemic. So if you look at what we do, it is hands-on science learning for children, and hands-on is, you could just say, the COVID was designed to destroy an organization like Agastya, right? Like, how do you go hands-on when you're not allowed to meet anyone, and when your entire business model rests around going to schools which were closed, interacting with children face to face, which was obviously not going to happen. And so a few things happened just around the pandemic, which, being on the board of Agastya, for me, I felt an immense sense of pride. One was, of course, before the lockdown was announced, Ramji had a meeting with all of us. And he said, listen, I'm going to apply what I call the daughter test, which is, if I don't feel comfortable sending my daughter out in the field as of today, I have no business risking any instructor or ignitor or anyone of our staff in doing the same thing. And so that sealed the deal. We said, okay, fine. So we are going into lockdown, even though the government hasn't officially said anything yet. And it came a few days later. So we were happy. We said, okay, fine. We've preempted it by a few days, and hopefully, that's helped. The other thing that happened was donors didn't all go away, which was extremely nice for us. A lot of the key donors called in saying, we understand there's no activity that's going to happen for we don't know how long, but rest assured, we know that there's an infrastructure here that you need to maintain. And when things do open up, you can't be in a situation where everybody's been asked to leave. So yes, there was some reduction in funding, but those were mainly for programs that was for operational expenses, which we knew weren't going to happen anyway. But the capital expenses or otherwise the fixed costs that we had in terms of keeping the organization alive, those were allowed. The other thing was the foundation had to take a call, and we did this with the employees' consent. We said, listen, either we have to leave 15% of our staff has to be asked to leave, or everybody takes a 15% cut and everybody stays. And there was, again, it was an absolute no-brainer, wherein everybody just said, well, that seems like a very obvious answer. Of course, everybody takes a cut and no one loses their job. So that was, you could say, stage one was survival was taken care of. At which point we said, okay, everyone just hunker down, keep your heads low, and when this passes, we'll have to discuss how we move forward. But of course, that was not enough for a lot of folks. A lot of folks in North Karnataka got restless within a few days. One of the things about Agastya is that energy. You can't keep it locked in, locked down, or contained for very long. So a couple of folks started discussing and said, hey, listen, we're doing these classes and I've heard of online classes. Let's start a WhatsApp group. Let's see if we can get some kids to maybe get one phone amongst 10 kids and start doing a few classes. And at least let's keep some buzz going on. And of course, the kids were bored, and many of them managed to, amongst 10, 15 of them, they'd rustle up one smartphone, thankfully. And so WhatsApp classes were happening. And this allowed some amount of activity, and across the organization, again, not just in North Karnataka, but in different pockets, this started, becoming the way that kids were engaging with Agastya. And then gradually that turned into an app. Somebody came across and said, listen, let's turn this into something that's a little more digital, a little more structured. So we developed what's called the We Learn app. And somewhere along the way, Ramji was keen that we send kits to schools and to children. So through some donor, we managed to develop about 20,000 kits, and we sent those across to kids. But each kit was about costing maybe 500 rupees or so, something in that range. So Ramji said, listen, that's too expensive for us to send to all the kids. So can we not bring the price down a little bit? So again, we workshopped it a little bit, and someone came back saying, okay, we can do this. We can reduce the price of this by this, make the box a bit cheaper. But ultimately, there's not much. I'm not sure if this is the same app. I should check, but the one that's
Yeah,
showing.
yeah, yeah. If you can share the link on WhatsApp, I can
Get
share it
it for
right
you, and
now.
yeah.
Thank
And
you.
so eventually we said, okay, we're not able to make it cheaper, but if we can get it to within 100 rupees, then folks came back saying, look, that's way too aggressive. There's no way we can make anything useful for 100 rupees. Now, we had a person on Agastya's campus who'd been working with a lot of children on origami. And so the idea came that, listen, can we not make a book of experiments that can then be made folding the paper? And this turned into what we call the ActiLearn. So it is a book of experiments in paper, which kids can then cut out, turn into different origami models, and then that becomes something that, yeah, exactly. So if you click on ActiLearn, I think there we go. And yeah, so what you see here is a brain map. So you can actually cut this out in the shape of it's a brain map, which becomes the shape of a cap, and you wear it on your head, and it shows you what are the different parts of your brain corresponding to what's on the cap. And again, these are certain origami. This is the bird, and this has become a bit of it's a great game changer, right? It's like taking something extremely low cost and making it very interactive. And again, 5, 6, maybe 7 kids can sit together and do this. So you get some amount of peer-to-peer learning. You get a collaborative effort between the kids. And ultimately, it's, as you can see, it's joy in learning. I remember getting books like this as a kid, and I would be absolutely bowled over if there was just sometimes in a magazine, there'd be 1 or 2 pages where you could cut out an experiment and do this. And here it's about 100 experiments. You can imagine the kind of joy a child that wants to learn would just spend days with a book like this. And at the end of it, of course, it would be completely cut up. And that is the idea. So things like this showed us that Agastya was, you could say, not willing to just lie down and take the pandemic at face value. They realized that there were ways around this. And this then, you could say, evolved into the Agastya 2.0 mission that we're now currently in, wherein we said, look, we've seen that digital and hands on can, in a way, create a kind of a hybrid method, what we call phygital learning, wherein we combine the benefits of both and consequently expand our reach and reach more kids. So when we talk about reaching 100 million children, one of the things we're thinking of is, yes, we need a digital backbone. And through the pandemic, we realized, yes, we can actually, or we have the skills to actually build content for the digital world, which help the kids at the other end almost to the same degree of richness as, say, maybe interacting with a with an ignitor one on one. So I think that actually showed in many ways Agastya's ability to see through the pandemic, and showed us how we can survive even though hands-on learning was not immediately available to us.
Uh, yes, I'll. We will finish the program in about 10-15 minutes. But I have one important learning. I like to confess. When you talk about ActiLearn and the origami, actually I ordered from various online portals those DIY drawing tools and books. Actually, I order them, and in my spare time, I will do the drawings and things. And it's actually quite like relaxing to do that thing. So where your mind gets stimulated not by the mobile phone or the something, but by doing something on your own. Okay. And you create something by doing origami and those do it by drawings and other things. You are creating something which is with your own hands, and you see the end result happening. So it's a good learning experience. It's like a relaxed learning experience
Yeah.
where there is no stress involved. So one aspect which I wanted to talk about before we close is that academics now is equated with stress. Stress is the I talk to people. I talk to people, professors, students, and the one thing they common is like I have too much pressure to do a lot of things. Okay. So, but the way we have shown that way in the book as well, that learning is equivalent to fun, learning is equivalent to engagement, learning is equivalent to curiosity.
Yeah.
So this magic mantra that Augusta is able to like crack, okay, and deliver at a price point which is, I think, it's next to impossible to do that because of the talented people that you have who have contributed, and the donors, organizations, individuals who have contributed to make this a reality. So what do you think in general the stress levels or the pressure levels that the academics now is a kind of a common thing, how this can be addressed by whatever you Augusta has learned in this journey?
See, don't uh, I don't mean to imagine that there's going to be no stress, obviously, in learning.
Hmm,
As I said, we normally aren't really engaging with kids in the 10th standard,
hmm,
because as much as you want to say, okay, learning is should not be about exams,
hmm, hmm,
unfortunately, there is still a very clear filter when it comes to you have to write an exam, and then that's the only way you can maybe go to college or get the subjects you want in
hmm,
plus two or whatever there is. What Agastya is trying to do is not necessarily eradicate fear, although that would be a great thing if we could do it, but to make a child understand at a very formative stage that there is a way of thinking, or that there is a way of applying your intelligence that may not be necessarily marks related. And what we hope is that a kid finishes exams, graduates, and regardless of whether or not they do well, some child might do extremely well in his exams, another child might not. The difference is the child that maybe doesn't do that well still believes that there is an intelligence inside them, because they've been allowed to experiment and they've been allowed to express that side of themselves. And then they might choose something that bends towards or otherwise addresses that level of intelligence. Right? So we always hear of 7 or 8 or 10 different kinds of intelligences, right? And
yeah,
typically in Indian schools, we really only test for two. We test for linguistics and we test for logical or mathematical. everything else is, we don't really test for musical intelligence. We don't really test for spatial intelligence, which is what, for example, an architect requires. So you could be a very weak student. You may not get great grades in science and maths, but you could be an excellent artist, and you could be someone that can look at a space and immediately envision how that space can be worked in different ways. And I think that's a talent that I don't have. I'm extremely bad when it comes to spaces. So you want a child to at least have access to the idea that having that skill or having that ability is not doesn't make mean that they can't do something great in life with it. And I think that is more what Agastya is doing. It's not to say that look, exams aren't important, or because unfortunately, not just in India but anywhere in the world, it's not easy to get into a Harvard or a Stanford or a Cambridge or an Oxford. These are still kids who are writing exams, writing papers, doing a lot to separate themselves from the crowd and differentiate themselves and become more capable and show that they are in fact worthy of getting into those institutions. But you will often find that folks come from, even if they haven't really been academically inclined throughout their lives, that they reach a point where they think, okay, do I do anything, or do I just sit back and say that, oh, I'm not good at anything? And I think what Agastya does is gives you enough tools to assess for yourself that, yes, I don't need to be afraid because, I've been taught how to think, and that can carry me quite far. And I think that's the crux of what we've tried to do.
Yeah, I think you touch upon a very important point that currently the tests that we go to exams, it's memory, logical, and articulation, how you
Yeah.
articulate it. So, but that is a small spectrum of a skill sets or intelligence that the human beings possess, and others are not being encouraged, tested, or how would I say, they are not being given enough importance. Okay.
Yeah.
So one important issue that I want to talk about, and then we can close the session, is that the Indian students are very bad at communication. They are unable to express themselves, express what they want to say. Okay. Where I have interviewed a lot of people, interviewed in my as a career, and this communication is something which is very weak among Indian students. Even somebody who's like a top ranker, but he'll not be able to articulate his thoughts in a way the way it should be done. What do you think? And is that something which is a cause of concern? Is like Augusta has some program that teach people how to have confidence and communicate to the other person in a very effective way? And do you think is that a very important skill that people should have, the social skills and the skills to communicate?
Yes, I also think communication is when we say weak communication, we are talking about English. And I don't know if
Hmm,
that's
hmm,
altogether fair. I can honestly
uh,
say, if you asked me to communicate a complex thought in Hindi, I would fail miserably. And I know many of my friends, especially from the north, when they speak in Hindi, I sit back and I say, "Wow, I wish I could, say those words or in that diction or in that kind of." And so it's really a matter of perception. And yes, unfortunately, or for whatever reason, the world has moved forward in an English speaking way. So it's in a sense heartbreaking that someone might have the intellect and the thought structure and the ability and the ideas to say or to have those ideas, but may not be able to articulate them in the English language the way that someone else might be able to. So I think that is unfortunately true for the time being. Indians
hmm, hmm, hmm,
have been quite good, I would say, overall, in terms of at least we are able to speak English, and we don't shun it completely. But I think what Agastya does again is involves kids in a lot of drama. It involves kids in a lot of programs on campus, wherein they're encouraged to go on stage and they're encouraged to speak. And the funny thing is, most people, if you do when they did a survey, people actually rate public speaking as their biggest fear, ahead of death,
that-
right? So a lot of people find it extremely tough to stand in front of a crowd and speak. And so Agastya does try and work with kids to say, okay, get on stage, say something, say anything. And that's part of the reason that caring and confidence are such critical parts of Agastya's ethos, is because we know that you can have an idea, you can have a spark, but if you're scared to say anything, then it pulls you back even when it doesn't necessarily need to. And I'm going to end by just saying that, when the British left, there was this idea that Indians make very good clerks. That was always the thing. You want a good bookkeeper, you want a good accountant, you want a guy that just does all the admin work in the office, get an Indian. He'll be honest, he'll know his work, he won't talk very much, right? And then as we got better at doing things, people said, oh, Indians make extremely good middle managers. Again, you want a good second line. You want a guy that kind of keeps everything checked, ensures that you're compliant with all the regulations, that the numbers all add up. Again, get an Indian as your middle management. This thing. Now Indians are seen as great CEOs. If you go abroad, all the big companies are headed by Indians now. Like so many of them that it's becoming a bit of a strange thing for us to behold that all these huge global companies are headed by Indians. And again, it's not a coincidence. It's a gradual leveling up that we've done in terms of building our mindset and building the way that we educate our youngsters. And the next level is going to be Indians make great entrepreneurs. We already have we have great companies, but a lot of them are, we're still not reached the point where our companies are absolutely world beaters. Like there's nothing else like it in the world. We're getting there, but we're still maybe a half a generation or so away from that. And I think what Agastya is doing, it has sown the seeds for that kind of thinking 25 years ago. Because you will see a kid in the next 10 years or 15 years who will build the next tech giant purely on the basis of a vision and an idea. And you will go back to the history and you'll say, yes, somewhere in this kid's past, creativity was a key part. It may not have been Agastya, but creativity was a key part of what they were told would be the most important thing that they learn. And they have harnessed that to actually become world beaters. And I'm looking forward to that. I honestly am.
Yeah. Thank you very much again all the audience who are watching this. The book is available in Amazon. It's a fascinating book. It will teach you management skills without reading a management book. I have learned a lot from this. And do not forget to read the last chapter, the key takeaway points. They are the gold mine of managing things, of management. Okay. This is the best thing I have seen for quite a long time. So thank you, Adhirath audience, do go ahead and buy the book. And Adhirath namaste and most thank you for your time. And I wish that your wish of seeing your students becoming great entrepreneurs comes true in reality. And I'll also request people. So if you want to contribute and volunteer, do go to the Augusta website, and they have a program where you can contribute and help it grow to become teach 100 million kids. Thank you very much, Adhirath.
Thank you. I
Namaste.
appreciate this so much.
Namaste. Jai Shri Ram.